In this video, I want to go ahead and demonstrate how easy it is to create a relationship map in InsightMaker. So just go to insightmaker.com. Hopefully you have your username and password by now. If not, click here and go through the steps to create a free account. Once you have your account set up, come back here and log in. And once you go through the login, it will essentially keep you logged in forever unless you explicitly log out. And once you finish login, create a new insight. That will take you to this page, and we don't need any of the stuff that's there. As I said, that's just there so that you're initially not faced with a blank sheet of paper, and there's actually a simulation model here that does run, and there's a lot of comments about how to go about building a model. It's a simulation model as opposed to a relationship map. So simply click here to close this, and the first thing that you want to do is click Save and say my first map, and I'm going to tag this as Udemy and creating insights with InsightMaker because that's the course that I'm doing this for. My first relationship works better when I can spell or type or whatever, and tell it save. The reason that I do that is so that every time I make a change, it will automatically save it, and I won't have to worry about it. Now, the individual elements that you create a map with are here. They're system dynamics elements and agent-based modeling and user interface elements, but you can use any of these elements that you want to create a relationship map because it's just a set of relationships. InsightMaker is not intended to do any calculations with it, so it doesn't make any difference what you use. I typically tend to use variables, so I add a variable. This is the default size and shape for a variable. You can click on it and move it around. InsightMaker is an object-oriented drawing environment so that all of the things that you draw, it remembers what they are. When you create the variable, notice that over here on the right-hand side is the configuration panel for that entity, and this varies from item to item. But the only part of it that we're going to use here is the name and the node part. So I can double click on this and I can say this is deadline. Still can't type. Which you'll notice that now it changes it over here also. So this is the deadline. You can also right click here on the canvas and you can select a primitive from the pull down, and once you do that it will simply deposit it on the canvas wherever you were. Though being the lazy person that I am, I typically, once I create an element that I'm going to use over and over again, I just hold down the control key and create a duplicate of it because it's easier. And I'm going to do this, call this expected completion date. So I now have two variables, and the premise is that the expected completion date for this project is far later than the deadline, which is not a good thing in terms of, well, if I'm responsible for the project, it's not a good thing. So we'll call this schedule gap, and then we'll use a link. Flows are something that you use in system dynamics models, so we're just going to use links to go ahead and connect these together. And as I said, the expected completion date is later than the deadline for the project. So if the expected completion date moves out further and further, the gap is the difference between the two of them. So this increases INCREA increases the gap, and this decreases the gap. Now, excuse me, the the default label for a link is link, and if the name of it is link, then it doesn't show up. Whereas if you name it anything else, that label will show up on the diagram. So if I change this back to link, then it doesn't show up. If it's also blank, it doesn't show up. All right. But if I call it increases, CRESES, then it does show up. Now notice that each time that I'm making a change here, this gets more solid and then it dims because it's actually saved the change back to the server. So I have a situation here where I have an expected completion date and a deadline, and the difference between those creates a schedule gap. And as a response to that, well, there are probably multiple responses that I could do, and one of them is to simply, let me take this and put it over here and say we could go ahead and work overtime as a response to this. So we could say this encourages to work overtime, and the work overtime should reduce the expected completion date. So I've created a relationship map saying that I have the difference between a deadline and an expected completion date creates a schedule gap. The schedule gap encourages overtime, and the overtime should actually reduce the completion date. Now, for links, you can actually curve them. If you select a link and hold down the Shift key, it will add a waypoint to that line, and you can then go ahead and reshape this. And you can add multiple waypoints so that you can curve it however you need to. And then there's a little yellow dot in the middle of the label so that you can place the label on the line when you're done with it, so that you can reshape the curves to sort of represent and get around other things. And if you decide that you want to remove one of these waypoints, if you select the line, hold the Shift key and click on it, it will then go away. So there's options for doing them. And then also there's an option here for note, so that you can add a note about this. This is when the project is, though there's only a limited amount that you can put here. Notice that there's a little down arrow. If you click this, it opens a note editor window, which also opens if you do a control period. This is when the project is supposed to be done. And notice that now that I have added a note, when I mouse over this, the little eye shows up, so I can click that and open it. I can close it with the eye or close it over here, either one. But it's amazing what you forget when you, over time, after you create a model, so that you could spend hours or days, maybe even weeks, working on a model, and you're extremely engrossed in it, and you are intimately familiar with it. Though if you come back to the model a week later, a month later, or a year later, I personally find it amazing what I forgot during the time that I was away. So I put notes on almost everything that I create, which attempt to explain why I did things, because most of my models I keep around for a very, very long time. And when I give them to other people, it's highly unlikely that simply looking at the labels is sufficient for them to understand what I was thinking when I crafted that part of the model. So I try to put notes on almost everything. You can also add notes to links. You can add notes to all of the objects in Insight Maker. This tends to make the gap smaller if I move the completion date out, so that I now have a note attached or associated with this link. So that's in a few minutes how easy it is to create relationship maps. If you have an item that you don't want, there's a set of edit buttons up here so that you can undo and redo, cut, copy, paste. And if you want to get rid of something, just hit the delete button. Also note that all of the objects are, whoops, sorry, wrong button, are resizable. Okay, and you can also alter them in terms of the orientation. And we'll get into some more of those details later. And in the next video, I'll actually sort of flush this map out a little bit more and talk about some more of the alternatives, about how I go about investigating some of the alternatives or the relationships for this particular start. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye.